Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Progress America Unfiltered. This is RHETT here with Linda. And Linda, I am so excited for today because you and I have never done a one-on-one. And here we are for a one-on-one where we'll be talking about some of our favorite topics, including the debt ceiling, which Linda is our pro on. And then we're also going to be talking about SCOTUS and what is up with the Chevron deference and really just, the overarching corruption that just is rampant in our federal government. So, Linda, I just want to hear a little bit about this debt ceiling conversation. What should people be paying attention to? What is going on? And really, what's going to be affected by this?
Hey, Rhett. Yeah, excited to be on with you and to talk about all of this. So recently, when I was on with Tyler, that was before the Republicans had voted on their debt ceiling bill, and now they did it. Nearly every Republican in the House voted for this bill, which Democrats are rightfully calling the Default on America, or DOA Act, because it is DOA in the Senate, and if it somehow passed that, then President Biden would veto it. But the problem is that this is now the demand that Republicans have laid out in return for not crashing the global economy by refusing to lift the debt ceiling, which is now projected that we're going to hit the debt ceiling around June 1st. So this is coming up soon. Republicans have now begun to lay out their hostage demands, and the mainstream media is giving Kevin McCarthy all this credit. They're fawning all over him, saying, "Look at you, Kevin. You united your caucus. You managed to pass this bill. And now President Biden should definitely negotiate with your very reasonable demands." And what the media isn't covering nearly enough is what's actually in this bill. And that's because Republicans, they performed a real sleight of hand where there's a few policies in this bill which are terrible but kind of red meat to their base. Things like defunding President Biden's student debt forgiveness and gutting the IRS's additional funding that's letting them finally require rich people to follow the rules and pay their taxes. So those are a few policies that are in there, but there's so much more that isn't, because what Republicans have done is they've set a number for the total federal budget for discretionary programs, which is most of the government, that's considerably lower than what the total budget is now. But then they're not specific about which programs that they're actually going to cut. And so if you do the math, and you see that Republicans have promised that they're not going to touch defense, that would mean cutting basically every other government program by 22%. And so that includes the Veterans Affairs Department, that includes the Social Security Administration, and many other agencies. And that means that they would have to close offices, lay off thousands of workers, and that it would be incredibly difficult for Americans, especially seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, to get the benefits that they've earned. But that's just not getting a lot of attention in the mainstream media because Republicans are saying, well, we didn't lay out that policy in our bill, so it's definitely not in there.
So, Linda, I really want to go back to this number of 22% that you just mentioned. And I think that's really important to mention that 22% in reframing that as 22 cents of every dollar that is going into these programs. So when we think about Meals on Wheels, when we think about food stamps, these programs that are being funded, could you imagine that if we took 22 cents out of every dollar that was going into them and the amount of harm that that would have for the public that is accessing them? I mean, these programs are absolutely essential to the livelihood of many people in this country and are very much relied on for the functionality of our society. And then imagining 22 cents for every dollar, nearly 25%, 25 cents, literally 1/4 out of every dollar taken away from them is absolutely frightening. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is meals taken out of the stomachs, right, of children, of seniors. It's people going hungry because Republicans don't want our government to help people who aren't rich and they just want to break it. What this proposal would do is cut the funding for the Social Security Administration, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and many other agencies. So even though they're not directly cutting benefits, what they're doing is making those benefits a lot harder to get. And so that means longer lines at offices, more time on the phone, and people dying and going bankrupt while waiting to claim the disability benefits that they earn with every paycheck.
Yeah, so Linda, we already talked about this distrust that is rampant within these social programs that was sowed by the Republican Party by this like continued campaign to make it harder for the American people to have faith in the government to access these programs as part of their campaign to kind of direct funding away. So this kind of funding that would be taken away from these programs, as you mentioned, is going to really harm the functionality of them. And it's going to continue to sow this like Republican kind of fed rage of these programs being ineffective. So they're taking away the funding to make it not effective. And then what is that going to result in? A decreased efficiency within the programs that just goes hand in hand with their message. So it's almost like, okay, yeah, like I'm going to take away the resources so you can't really operate effectively, but then we're going to blame you for not being effective. Totally wild, totally their campaign. But I love what you said about this being dead on arrival in the Senate, because as you said, the Senate isn't going to have this under Democratic control. The President Biden is not going to let this fly. But it's really important that we note what the future of the Republican Party is when this is the kind of mechanism that they believe that we should function under. It's totally frightening, totally scary. And I think that we're doing the absolute right thing by flagging this for the public, because as you said, the mainstream media is letting them get a pass on this when that's absolutely not right. So here we are to set the record straight. Linda, thank you so much for that. And I think just to kind of hop into our second topic here, which is kind of this furthering the discussion of the kind of like power grabs within our government. So we talked about kind of Congress's power grab, the Republicans doing this thing to kind of decrease funding revenues that are so important. Now we're going to talk about the Supreme Court. And we're going to talk about the court's kind of mechanism for grabbing power, hoarding power, and expanding their power over the executive branch in a way that could be described as really like kind of against the like checks and balances of our Constitution. And so we're going to talk about the Chevron deference up next. This is something that the Supreme Court just agreed to take in front of them this past Monday. We're still waiting to hear what the arguments are going to be like, but it is definitely upcoming and something for us all to pay attention to and rally on behalf of. So in the reasonably likely event that the court does overrule this decision, that this would mean the death of one of the most cited decisions in the federal judiciary. So they're basically going to be undoing something called the Chevron deference. Linda, tell me more about it. What do you think about this? You told me you took a little bit of a crash course on this, and I think it would be very helpful if you could share it with our viewers today.
Yeah, so Chevron, it's one of the most cited decisions in legal decisions, and it's used basically as a foundation of the administrative state to say when Congress passes a law that doesn't get super specific in all the details, then the executive branch is able to interpret that. And especially as Congress has become increasingly gridlocked, as it's also lost a lot of staff actually in the last few decades. There's just not as many people working in Congress who can really write detailed laws that it's really been relied upon that the executive branch is able to interpret legislation. Congress even kind of does it on purpose sometimes, leaves things a little vague and lets the executive branch figure it out. And it's essential to having a functioning government, and in particular to having proper climate regulations, to really being able to do anything there. And so without Chevron, what it would do is transfer a lot more power to the judicial branch, to the least democratic and non-elected branch of our government, and take it away from the executive branch. And so things like, how much nitrogen could be discharged by a wastewater treatment plant, right? Whether coal miner workers can get disability benefits, all of those things are figured out by the executive branch now. And if the Supreme Court actually does strike down this Chevron precedent, then all of these things would become the subject of litigation instead, would have to go through various courts, would take forever, and really our government would cease to function properly. And so in a lot of ways, it actually shows the ideology of the Republican Party and the far-right movement, because it's very similar to the debt limit bill, and that both of these things are just designed to break our government.
Yeah, they don't believe in governance, so it's like, let's just break the government. And so I think kind of in this conversation about the Supreme Court, there's something that came out fairly recently about the rampant like corruption within Justice Clarence Thomas on the court and his ties to a Republican billionaire that also has ties to our least favorite independent senator, Kirsten Sinema from Arizona. And so, Linda, you and I were together in DC about a week ago. That's a little TikTok sound. About a week ago. Shout out to anybody that recognized that. But we were talking about our favorite karaoke songs, and you mentioned to me that you performed "Wicked" for one of your karaoke finals for this awesome karaoke league that you are a part of. That I'm so jealous that I'm not part of. But to talk about something that is a little wicked, if you will, let's talk about Republican billionaire Harlan Crow and his power over Justice Clarence Thomas, over Senator Kyrsten Sinema, and just kind of the funding of these private vacations, these private jet rides for Justice Thomas, for Senator Sinema's just kind of electoral lifestyle of staying in the Ritz-Carlton, all of this bougie stuff. It's just a little bit wild that we're seeing such an powerful, unelected Republican donor doing the things that, are so common for them, just acting like billionaire unelected officials for our government, exercising influence over people, both elected and unelected, in the case of Clarence Thomas, just to, hold power, to influence them, dissuade them with the kind of the mechanism of supplying them with these private jet rides, with these little vacations, all these things that are really just so inaccessible to the average American. But for these people in power, it's such a vehicle for hoarding their power, exercising their power, and just kind of living a lifestyle free of, the chaos that all of us have to endure. Linda, do you have any thoughts on what's going on with this Republican donor, Harlan Crow, and this expose about Justice Thomas and his ties to Kyrsten Sinema as well?
Yeah, so I think it just shows broadly, who's pulling the strings of the Republican Party, as well as a tiny minority of Democrats or now independents like Kyrsten Sinema, and that it's these billionaires who think that, oh, I don't need government to function because I can just use my money to get anything I want, and I don't want to pay any taxes, so I'm just going to break it and fund politicians who want to break government. And the thing is that they're actually wrong about that, too. Jeff Bezos, for example, he might think, I don't need government for anything. I don't even need roads because I can just fly my private jet around. But the truth is that his delivery trucks, right, still need a government that's maintaining the roads, need laws, right, people enforcing traffic laws, and that you can't have a functioning society and you can't build a successful business without the government doing its job. We live in a society, and that society needs to be funded, but these billionaires are just so myopic that they can't see beyond not wanting to pay their fair share.
Yeah, and it's this kind of disbelief that billionaires have in our government, that they think that they're so above it or something, and they kind of have this just thing that's just oh yeah, the government's a body that exists for the average person. I am not average. I exist beyond it. It's shouldn't you be loving the government and the current system that has allowed you to benefit and get so wealthy and just hoard this unelected power? Shouldn't you be loving it? I don't understand it. It's they have this anger that that they're entitled to living this private jet lifestyle. I just keep harping on that because the private jets, they're so wasteful. When we talk about the climate crisis, that's a whole other conversation there. But it's also I feel like they should love the government. I mean, it's allowed you to hoard power. It's allowed you to get so wealthy. It's allowed you to just live on the expense of everybody else. Yet here they are exercising this undue influence over people like Justice Thomas, like Senator Sinema, to do things that are bad and are harmful to the American people. Linda, I feel like we covered a lot of ground in this episode. Is there anything you want to say, or you want to tie this all together before we close out today?
Well, I know before the show we had talked about, since these topics are a little heavy, maybe closing it out with something a little fun. So you mentioned some of my recent karaoke activities. Shout out to District Karaoke. And so I know we were saying we might talk a little bit about the different politicians running for president and their rally playlists. And so I gotta say, the only singular thing that I think that Donald Trump, actually is kind of good at, that, I mean, I'm not going to say that I like about him because I don't like anything about him, but I do think that his rally playlist, it's very smart. It's one of the best of any politicians because it just has all of these songs that They're very catchy. They're very nostalgic for boomers. They're all artists that hate him and wish that he wasn't using their songs. But he's got Macho Man, Village People, Elton John, Bruce Springsteen. And, it's not a surprise that, in particular, people who grew up with those songs really, enjoy that aspect of his rallies. And so I'm curious what Joe Biden is going to be doing to match that this time around. He didn't really have a lot of rallies last time around, understandably because of COVID, but this time he has a chance to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump in the rally playlist department.
This kind of reminds me too of like Biden's inauguration when we saw Lady Gaga singing the national anthem. And I saw like somebody post on Twitter, like, I can't believe they hosted a Lady Gaga concert at the Capitol building today. And I'm like, wow, you really miss like, that was so good. So good. I shout out to Fight Song by Rachel Platten. I think that was an amazing song from the Hillary Clinton campaign, which feels like a million years ago now. But Fight Song, I think, is always going to be one of my favorites because it's just like it's just so indicative of just like that very like optimistic. Like I saw it on The View, they compared like the two campaigns to like Soul Cycle versus like a boot camp, and like the Rachel Platten era is like very, inspirational. And I feel like I tend to fall into that like circus tent a little bit more. I don't know about you, Linda, but I feel so inspired by that. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And thank you all so much for watching today. Linda, thanks for having this little one-on-one Kiki. This was so much fun. It was so great to get to chat with you a little bit more. Linda and I hung out last week in person, and so it was so fun to continue that conversation today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to like, share, comment, and subscribe, you know where to do that. And thank you so much for sharing this video as well. Comment down below. Let us know what you think. We look forward to seeing you later this week on Progress America Unfiltered. Have a great one. Bye-bye.